I suppose the ironic thing is if they're struggling now and maybe they push through it, they'll come out stronger individuals from
That's
that.
right. That's right.
So another thing that, which is something you've already mentioned, is the pleasure pain balance, which especially with the image of the gremlins, which I found very useful. But one thing I found fascinating about this is I'm seeing similar balances with other aspects of life. And it's this idea of yin yang, masculine, feminine, chaos, order. And it seems that the best way to operate these things is to go right in the middle, or make sure you're keeping the balance going. So a lot of people will take the idea of pain literally, whereas the idea of pain to me would be, which I think you're alluding to in the book, is if you go out for a run, for example, it's not a painful experience, but it is hard. And you will get pleasure afterwards. So it's tipping the balance towards pain to get the pleasure afterwards.
That's right.
So do you think that's useful advice for someone who's struggling with addiction, to almost harness struggle or harness pain to get the pleasure down the road?
Yes. So I advise this to all of my patients, especially in early recovery. First of all, just not using their drug of choice will be painful, as the balance then tips to the side of pain, and the gremlins are sort of camped out there hopping up and down. And of course, if we wait long enough and abstain for long enough, those gremlins hop off and homeostasis, or a level balance, is restored. But one of the things that we can do to speed up that process of withdrawal and restoring homeostasis is actually intentionally do things that are hard, press intentionally on the pain side of the balance, which is counterintuitive. But when we do that, then those neuroadaptation gremlins actually hop on the pleasure side. And that's things that, as you say, are hard, like going for a run. I also talk about ice cold water baths, but it can be something even more modest than that, like just unplugging, just not listening to music, not watching a show, not being on our computers, sitting in a silent room. That can be really scary and painful. We're suddenly left with our own turbulent thoughts and imaginations and worries and conscience. The things I should have done and didn't do, the ways I've harmed other people. That in itself is really, really hard. But again, really important, because what it does is it builds up those mental calluses. It's basically, we're making dopamine. Whenever I go and ride my bike up this steep hill near my house, I just think I'm making dopamine, because we really are. What happens when we do things that are hard is that there's a gradual, for example, ice cold water baths, there's a gradual increase in dopamine through the duration of the hard thing, like exercise, right, for example, too. And then when we stop that hard thing, those dopamine levels are actually maintained at an elevated level for hours afterwards, which is really amazing. Now, contrast that to using an immediate feel-good substance. What we get is a sudden upward spike of dopamine for a very brief period, followed by a plummeting of dopamine, not just down to baseline levels, but below baseline levels. That's the dopamine deficit state, or the gremlins hopping on the pain side of the balance, before it's restored. So there's a huge cost, right? As opposed to this and then that.